So let's talk pandemic. I know we sort of touched on this before, but very, very interesting time that we've been through, and one that I hope we never go through again. But it taught us a lot, but it also allowed us to observe a lot. It certainly had a profound impact on women in the workplace.
Mm.
So, what's been the biggest shift you've experienced in how women present themselves now versus COVID?
Look, there's a couple of things, and there's almost like a plus and a minus at the same time, which I sometimes feel like I'm not sure whether they equal each other out. Um, I'll use myself as an example. I used to be on a plane almost every week. If I wasn't on a plane, I'd be in the CBD. I don't do as much travel as I used to, and I quite like that. I've got into a different rhythm with life that has impacted, in some ways, how I dress. But I'm very conscious, if I'm on an online session, I am dressed for it. I often have this debate with my husband because he'll be doing sessions and I'll be going, "You really going to turn up in that shirt?" He goes, "Oh yeah, it's just casual." I'm like, "You got clients today?" He goes, "Oh yeah, but we're tech." And I'm like, "Okay." Because I do think there's been a casualization of what people wear. And in some respects, I think that can be great because it does mean that there's less effort. You're not wasting as much time in the morning getting dressed. But how you dress can impact how you feel and therefore impact how you show up. And so, I know I will have days where, I am working, but I'm in, gym gear, active wear, whatever sort of language you want to call it. But on those days, I do not have client calls. And so it doesn't matter. But if I've got a client session, I would always get dressed for it in a way that aligns with how they would see me if I was having a meeting with them in town. So once again, I think it comes back to, it's like that sense of choice where I feel like a lot of us through the pandemic, it was survival mode.
Mm.
It was new. There was just a whole load of crap that people were dealing with, a lot of emotional heaviness. And, many of us were just struggling to get through the day. I mean, I know for myself, I discovered a whole layer of emotions that I had never had to deal with before. And I often think that's been really good for me because it's given me additional awareness and empathy for what people can go through. And that can be a really powerful insight to have. But we are now through the pandemic. We're into that analysis of a different stage. I feel like the emotional hangover that a lot of people have had, for some, it's still lingering, but it's now going, okay, for the next stage in my career, wherever that I want to go, how does how I turn up play into that?
Mm.
And what do I then consciously want to do with that?
Mm.
Because your clothes do impact how you feel and impact how people see you.
Yeah, well, totally. Well, for a lot of women who were struggling and who were having to deal with lots of different things throughout the day, um, they also significantly changed, some of them, in terms of weight gain, weight loss, everything. So the wardrobes they were working with pre-COVID weren't necessarily going to cut it, coming out of COVID. And so they're left with this dilemma. Well, what do I do? Sometimes their values have changed completely, and you may have experienced this in some of your discussions that you've had with leadership groups and some of your training, that women are in this space of, well, what am I supposed to do now? How am I supposed to show up now? Is it acceptable to wear my sneakers into the boardroom and just have a smart jacket on? For a lot of my clients, a lot of them are wanting to go back to a more professional attire and to restore that level of, what do we call it? Predictability, I suppose. I don't know what people expect to see of senior executives, but then there's other women that say, well, why should we have to? And
Mm.
I think we're still trying to sort this all out, as women. Well, where do we sit in all of this? What are your observations in some of the groups that you've been speaking to?
I always go back to who are you and who do you want the world to see you as? And make
Personal.
your own, and make your own choice rather than looking at what everyone else is doing. Like, it's interesting because I do a lot of executive sort of facilitation sessions. And I did one recently. So 2 days, one day was team, one day was much more strategy. And my shoes changed, my outfit changed on those 2 days because they were very different purpose. The day 2 was much more hands-on, where I knew I was going to be running around the room. So I had sand shoes on. Day 1, I did not have sand shoes on. I didn't have a heel, but I had a little kind of, I don't know what you call it, one of those little tiny heels.
Or a comfortable shoe, yeah.
Exactly. And a lot of the other people who turned up were either in boots or in sand shoes. And this was, an executive leadership team, but it was, it wasn't off-site. But I'm always really conscious, particularly on that sort of first day, about the image that I'm putting across. Day 2, I was like, I have to be practical here in terms of what are the shoes that are going to be comfortable to be able to get me through the day. But I'm like you, when you're talking about before, I look at some of the clothes in my wardrobe, they're amazing. And some of my great shoes, I go, I want to wear you again. I don't want to not wear you again. Although I did discover that my shoe size changed during COVID.
Really?
Yeah, well, I lost a little bit of weight. And so you would think, doesn't that mean my shoe size might get smaller? But no, my shoe size actually got half a size bigger. And the podiatrist said, you've spent a couple of years in sand shoes or Birkenstocks. He goes, your feet have spread. So yes, I had a whole heap of shoes that I had to give away.
Goodness gracious. I haven't heard that, but it makes perfect sense that, that can actually happen. You have to retrain, and some women called retraining their bodies to actually, be able to put a wasted garment back on again, as opposed to something that was elasticized or, was training gear, which, allows you to put on weight and you don't even know you're doing it. Right?
Yes, exactly. So I go back to the, how do you want to feel, and do what works for you, and do what works for your environment as well, because there is no doubt that different industries and different professions have changed the standards of what's acceptable, and it's no longer what felt like quite sort of flat, meaning that every industry profession felt similar. I feel like it's quite distinct now, depending on what sector you're in, as to what is the norm of dressing.
Yeah, and I think it's also governed by who's leading the various organisations, because they all are as individuals, and they say it all starts from the top, don't they, Michelle? So if they're setting a theme to dress a certain way, then then that tends to filter down the organisation.
I
Absolutely.
remember many years ago, and this is way before the pandemic, and there was a particular CEO in an organization that I worked for, and he did not like denim. Now, you could do smart casual on a Friday, but no denim. Anyway, people kind of ignored that and started turning up to work on a Friday in a denim, and then a very direct message came out direct from his inbox that had not been filtered through corporate communications. What part of no denim don't you understand? Whereas I would go these days, you can have very beautifully tailored denim,
Yes.
and denim's very in at the moment. So I kind of go, I feel like we've moved a bit away from that.
Well, that's where I think the boundaries have all shifted a little bit, and in some cases become a little bit muddied. So that's where people's confusion are, well, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. But you're quite right. It's all about really sitting down and identifying, well, what are my values? How do I want the world to perceive me? Which should reflect then in terms of choice of dress code to reflect your personality as well, and trying to be as true to yourself as possible with what you wear, and not trying to emulate other people.